On December 8th, 1963, the world was shocked by one of the most audacious kidnappings in American history. The target was Frank Sinatra Jr., the 19-year-old son of legendary singer Frank Sinatra. Just days after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, Sinatra Jr. was snatched from his dressing room at Harrah's Club Lodge in Lake Tahoe, California, a place known for its glamorous appeal and high-profile guests. The perpetrators of this brazen crime were Barry Keenan and Joe Amsler, both 23 years old and former high school classmates from Los Angeles. These amateur criminals, driven by desperation and a risky plan, had been tracking Sinatra Jr. from city to city, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Their goal was simple: kidnap the young singer and demand a hefty ransom from his famous father. Keenan and Amsler's scheme was meticulously planned, but ultimately doomed to unravel. They chose the evening of December 8th for their operation, seizing Sinatra Jr. while he was at a performance in Lake Tahoe. The timing of their crime, so close to a national tragedy, only added to the shock and urgency surrounding the case. Once inside Sinatra Jr.'s dressing room, Keenan and Amsler took control of the situation swiftly. They bound Sinatra Jr.'s friend, who was present, and blindfolded Sinatra Jr. before transporting him to their hideout in the Los Angeles suburbs. Meanwhile, the friend managed to free himself and alert authorities, setting off a massive manhunt. This case attracted intense media coverage, partly due to the high profile of Sinatra Sr. and the bizarre nature of the crime. The involvement of Frank Sinatra, one of the most beloved figures in entertainment, added layers of drama and intrigue to an already complex story. As the FBI was quickly brought into the case, the focus shifted to the demands of the kidnappers and the race to secure Sinatra Jr.'s safe return. The investigation would reveal much more about the criminals involved and the daring rescue that followed. This introduction sets the stage for a detailed exploration of the events and aftermath of the Frank Sinatra Jr. kidnapping, a case that remains etched in American crime history. On the evening of December 8th, 1963, the quiet ambiance of Harrah's Club Lodge in Lake Tahoe was shattered by a daring crime. Frank Sinatra Jr., who was just beginning his career as a singer, was performing at the club when Barry Keenan and Joe Amsler made their move. Their plan, months in the making, was about to come to fruition. Sinatra Jr. was backstage, relaxing with his friend and band member John Foss, when the kidnappers arrived. Keenan and Amsler, posing as delivery men, knocked on the dressing room door around 9 p.m. Their seemingly innocuous presence quickly turned sinister. Keenan, armed with a gun, forced his way into the room. The situation escalated rapidly as Keenan and Amsler overpowered Foss, binding him with tape and blindfolding Sinatra Jr. Once Sinatra Jr. was incapacitated, the two kidnappers swiftly moved him out of the dressing room and into their waiting car. Their choice of vehicle, a nondescript car, was intended to avoid drawing attention. As they drove away, they passed through a roadblock set up by local police. Despite the heightened security, Keenan's smooth talking and bluffing allowed them to slip through and continue their journey to Los Angeles. Meanwhile, Foss, who had managed to free himself, wasted no time in alerting the authorities. He contacted the police immediately, providing them with a description of the kidnappers and the vehicle. The news spread quickly, and a frantic search began. As Keenan and Amsler drove south, their journey was marked by a mix of anxiety and tension. They were aware of the growing police presence, but remained confident in their plan. The drive from Lake Tahoe to Los Angeles was roughly 400 miles, and despite several roadblocks and checkpoints, they managed to evade capture and reach their hideout in Canoga Park, a suburban area in Los Angeles. The kidnappers' plan was to hold Sinatra Jr. for ransom and demand a significant sum from his wealthy father, Frank Sinatra Sr. The stakes were high, and the pressure was mounting. As they settled into their hideout, the next phase of their plan was set into motion, making contact with Sinatra Sr. and delivering their ransom demand. kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr. not only caused a media frenzy, but also highlighted the audacity and desperation of the criminals involved. With the authorities closing in and the public watching closely, the case was far from over. The next steps would involve the crucial negotiations and the subsequent investigation that would reveal the full extent of the criminals' scheme and their eventual downfall. With the kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr., now a high-profile case, the FBI quickly stepped in to lead the investigation. On the morning of December 9th, 1963, the FBI office in Reno was notified of the abduction. Agents immediately began coordinating with local authorities and preparing for a thorough investigation. The first step was to establish contact with Sinatra Sr., who was in Reno at the time. The FBI briefed him on the situation and advised him to wait for the ransom demand. They recommended that Sinatra Sr. follow the kidnappers' instructions and allow the Bureau to track the money once it was paid. This strategy aimed to lead the authorities directly to the kidnappers. As the FBI worked to set up the ransom exchange, the kidnappers made their next move. On December 10th, Keenan contacted John Irwin, who was responsible for communicating with Sinatra Sr. Irwin, who had initially been part of the planning, but was not present during the abduction, was now tasked with delivering the ransom demand. He instructed Sinatra Sr. to expect further instructions and prepared to make the call. The demand for ransom was set at $240,000. This amount was substantial, but the kidnappers believed it was a reasonable figure given the high profile of their victim and his family. Sinatra Sr. promptly gathered the money and handed it over to the FBI. The Bureau meticulously photographed the cash and made the drop as per Keenan's instructions. The drop-off took place early in the morning of December 11th at a designated spot between two school buses in Sepulveda, California. The precise location was chosen to minimize the risk of being observed or intercepted. As the exchange was carried out, the FBI agents kept a close watch, hoping to catch the kidnappers in the act. However, as the ransom was being collected, the situation took an unexpected turn. Irwin, feeling increasingly nervous about the scheme, decided to release Sinatra Jr. rather than follow through with the plan. Sinatra Jr., disoriented but unharmed, managed to walk a few miles to Bel Air. There, he encountered a security guard who drove him to his mother's home. The release of Sinatra Jr. did not end the investigation. The FBI now had a critical lead: the house in Canoga Park, where Sinatra Jr. had been held. Agents conducted a search of the property, collecting valuable evidence that would play a key role in the case. With Sinatra Jr. safe and the ransom money in hand, the focus shifted to locating and apprehending the kidnappers. The FBI's progress was closely followed by the media, which only heightened the pressure on the criminals. Realizing that the net was closing in, John Irwin's brother, upon learning about the crime, contacted the authorities in San Diego. This tip led to the capture of Keenan and Amsler, and most of the ransom money was recovered. As the investigation continued, the FBI's careful handling of the evidence and the successful tracking of the suspects underscored the Bureau's commitment to solving the case. The next phase would involve piecing together the remaining details of the crime, leading up to the trial and the ultimate conviction of those responsible. As the investigation into the kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr. progressed, the FBI and local authorities delved deeper into the case, aiming to piece together the full story behind the abduction. With Keenan, Amsler, and Irwin in custody, the focus shifted to understanding the full scope of their criminal activities and uncovering any additional details about the kidnapping. The FBI's meticulous investigation led them to the house in Canoga Park, California, where Sinatra Jr. had been held captive. The property was thoroughly examined, and agents gathered crucial evidence that included fingerprints and personal items. The house, rented by the kidnappers as a temporary hideout, provided significant insights into their planning and execution of the crime. Meanwhile, John Irwin, who had initially been involved in the kidnapping but had not physically participated in the abduction, began to crack under the pressure. As investigators questioned him, he revealed key details about the plot and the roles of his co-conspirators. Irwin's cooperation proved instrumental in building a solid case against Keenan and Amsler. In addition to the information from Irwin, Sinatra Jr.'s testimony played a crucial role in the investigation. Although he had limited interactions with the kidnappers, his descriptions helped law enforcement officials piece together the timeline and details of the abduction. Sinatra Jr. recalled being blindfolded and bound, and provided information about the voices he heard, which aided in identifying the suspects. The FBI also reviewed phone records and other communications between the kidnappers and Sinatra Sr. These records provided further evidence of the ransom demands and the instructions given for the drop-off. By analyzing these communications, agents were able to track the movements of the kidnappers and piece together their plan. As the case gained media attention, the public followed the investigation closely. The media coverage, while sometimes sensationalized, helped keep the case in the public eye and put additional pressure on the criminals. This exposure, coupled with the diligent work of the FBI, contributed to the eventual capture of the kidnappers. The investigation revealed that Barry Keenan, Joe Amsler, and John Irwin had meticulously planned the kidnapping, but their lack of experience and growing paranoia led to their downfall. The FBI's ability to gather evidence, combined with the cooperation of those involved, ensured that the kidnappers would face justice for their actions. The next step in the legal process would involve the trial of Keenan, Amsler, and Irwin, where the details of their crime would be scrutinized in court. The investigation had not only uncovered the specifics of the kidnapping, but also highlighted the flaws in the criminals' plan and their eventual capture. The kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr. ended with a dramatic conclusion as the legal process unfolded. By February 10th, 1964, the trial of Barry Keenan, Joe Amsler, and John Irwin began, capturing significant public and media interest. The courtroom was packed as the details of the crime were laid bare, and the defendants faced the consequences of their actions. Barry Keenan, Joe Amsler, and John Irwin were all convicted for their roles in the kidnapping. Despite their initial plans to hold Sinatra Jr. for ransom and their attempt to escape capture, the evidence presented in court left little doubt about their guilt. The FBI's thorough investigation and the testimony of Sinatra Jr. and Irwin proved crucial in securing the convictions. Keenan, who had masterminded the plot due to his financial desperation and personal issues, was ultimately deemed legally insane at the time of the crime. His mental state was a significant factor in the court's decision, and he was sentenced to a long prison term, but only served a small portion. Joe Amsler received a similar fate, facing a significant prison sentence, while Irwin, who had initially been less involved but still complicit, was also convicted and sentenced. Throughout the trial, the defense attempted to argue that the kidnapping was a publicity stunt orchestrated by Frank Sinatra Jr. himself. However, the evidence against the defendants, including Keenan's confession letter, refuted this claim. The jury and the public remained convinced of the defendant's guilt, and the case was widely reported as a clear example of the consequences of criminal behavior. Frank Sinatra Sr., despite the emotional toll of the kidnapping and the recent assassination of his close friend President John F. Kennedy, continued with his life and career. The stress of the ordeal and its impact on his family was significant, but Sinatra managed to complete the film project he was working on, Robin and the Seven Hoods, which was a testament to his resilience. The case had lasting effects on those involved. Sinatra Jr., although physically unharmed, carried the psychological impact of the kidnapping with him for years. The kidnapping also led to increased security measures and changes in how such high-profile cases were handled by law enforcement. In retrospect, the Frank Sinatra Jr. kidnapping remains a notable example of an audacious crime that was ultimately solved through the diligent investigation and legal proceedings. It serves as a reminder of the complexities involved in high-profile criminal cases and the determination required to seek justice.